Tortora, who was on just a moment ago. Great insights into how technology is being applied, apps to help small businesses, farmers market, connect with consumers. Now, of course, the honored guest of every Business Monday, cha-ching, the money man, Gary Sasse. He knows all, sees all, touches all. Let's start at the federal government. Trade wars. Trade wars are good and we can win those, right? That's what the President of the United States says.
Is that what the President of the United States
I
said?
believe he said it last Friday.
Well,
Trade wars are good and we can win them.
I will tell you this in my very humble opinion, that the proposed tariff on steel and aluminum is probably the biggest policy blunder since Smoot-Hawley in 1929, which led to a worldwide recession. I'm not sure it's going to be a worldwide recession, but the policy is an affront to economic common sense. I don't know how to say it more directly than I just
So
said.
the market reacted strongly on Thursday and Friday. Today it was up 300 points. Do they just not think he's serious and that smarter people in his administration will beat him down?
I don't know.
What's the market today?
It's a very difficult.
Markets don't usually like trade wars. That's not a very good.
Well, it's not even a trade war. It's just bad.
It's up 336 today.
It's just bad economics for us. If it'll punish American workers. It's about 6.5 million workers in this country who work in companies that use steel in manufacturing their product. There are about 150,000 people that work in steel mills. That's the first one. And if you look at what steel is used for, about 40% of steel production are used for transportation, cars, planes, trains. Another 20% is used for packaging, and about 15% is for construction. Now, we're going to get a bonus in this.
Yeah.
You realize that when they go to build a Pawtucket Stadium, that their budget is already out of whack now, potentially, because the steel's going to cost them more. So
that'll be Worcester's problem, not ours.
No.
Secretary of Commerce was on diminishing the critique of it, saying that as a percentage of building a car, it was $1.50.
Yeah.
Of making a can of beer, it was less than a third of a penny or something like that.
It's about a penny, about 2 pennies. Yeah, but old Wilbur's sitting there, and he's sitting on millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah, Wilbur's worth $1 billion or so, right?
Yeah,
Isn't
so
he?
some poor guy sitting in Cranston that's worth $75,000.
Yeah.
When he has to pay another 10% for his car, he'll recognize it. Or when he has to pay another 50 cents on a six-pack, he'll recognize it. That's a pretty plutocratic attitude. And the only thing I can say about Wilbur is he was awake because it was before 11 o'clock. That's all I know. But no, it punishes American workers. It's a worse kind of tax increase. It's really a tax on.
And an unnecessary tax, right? I mean, the president makes a point, though, that we've got trade deficits. They've been endless trade deficits. We're being taken advantage of by certain foreign powers, certainly China. China violates most trade agreements. They manipulate pricing. They leverage and subsidize. They steal our technology endlessly. I mean, we're worried about the Russians with our elections, that we should be equally concerned about the Chinese and thievery of technology. What's the interim step, if not?
Well, China is a self-inflicted wound, because I haven't heard of an American corporation that did move over to China to make a few bucks.
Yeah.
And so it was dollars over patriotism. But in terms of the steel, let's just stick to the current subject.
Sure.
We import about 2.2% of the steel that we use from China.
Yeah.
And rightfully so. If the president wanted to have a policy to deal with China and deal with steel, I think everyone would support that.
Yeah.
Same as Russia. We get about 8% of the steel we use from Russia. Most of it comes from our friends. It comes from Canada, it comes from South Korea, it comes from Mexico. And the trade relationships with those countries is very, very important. And what will happen, instead of importing steel, we'll just import the finished products. So instead of getting steel from Canada, you'll get a car that was made in Canada coming down here. I mean, if you I don't know what the president did at the Wharton School for 4 years, but he sure as hell didn't learn anything about economics. And this is not a question of free trade, versus protectionism.
I'm not defending him, but I'm gonna play devil's advocate a little bit. This morning I heard the jobs are up another 200,000.
Yep.
There's really no more new jobs we can virtually produce. Stock market's humming along, it's at 24 something. The economy, despite all these little blunders and whatnots, seems to be cooking along from a national standpoint. Does he have a point, and I'm not defending it, but does he have a point in that it's important to keep our competitors, our foreign competitors, some of which we claim are our friends or may not be, a little off balance, that these little digs that he makes
Yes,
sometimes have a strategic
I'm
value?
not talking about digs, I'm talking about economics. And it's our enlightened interest to negotiate tough, to keep some of our trading partners off balance. But you don't shoot yourself in the leg. What this does in effect is it punishes American workers, and it's an increased tax on American consumers. Now, the president's worked very hard to, I suppose,
I suppose.
but judged by results, to move to deregulate, move to, cut taxes, and in spite of all the hyper-partisan whining, it seems to be doing some good. Well, why then undo what you were doing? The president promised that we'd have 3% economic growth, 3% growth in gross national product. Well, this takes away from it. You don't have to be a genius to figure this one out. If you can buy a product, cheaper elsewhere, you buy the product cheaper. If you can have to increase your prices, so you lose, volume, workers lose their jobs. This just makes no economic sense. And
So, it's been widely reported on GoLocal Live Business Monday that you seem to have a special relationship with an influential member of the United States Senate, correct?
several.
Several of them.
Okay.
Anybody from Tennessee and one guy from Florida.
No, I was born and raised in Florida, you know that.
Yeah,
So,
I do know that.
and the other senator from Florida is not of my political persuasion.
He is not, but Senator Rubio, who is emerging as one of the more influential members of the United States Senate. The United States Senate is not has some influence in this and can make some noise and can actually take action if they see
Well,
deem it.
you're going to see some reaction in the Congress because Speaker Ryan, I'm told, today was supposed to have, he may have already said it, but it was supposed to have, come out and say this thing wouldn't cut muster in the House.
Yeah.
The Club for Growth,
Right.
an old Rhode Islander who now is from Pennsylvania, Pat Toomey.
Right. LaSalle Academy
Right.
graduate.
Headed the Club for Growth before he was elected to the Senate from Pennsylvania. Club for Growth called it, they were worse than I was. They called it an affront to economic freedom. So, I haven't got freedom involved in this yet. It's not consistent, the policy, and it's not protectionism versus globalism or free trade.
Yeah.
It's intelligent protectionism. and so when you look at these commodities, steel at a 25% tariff,
Right.
you really have to look at the implications on consumers and on jobs. The whole purpose of the Trump economic policy, and the whole purpose of any economic policy, is to protect American workers.
I think it was
American
Tom. I
investment.
think it was Tom Brokaw this morning on Morning Joe said he worries that as the president gets more and more pressure on some of these ancillary legal issues, that he lashes out to change the dialogue, and that these things are dangerous, and that this is an example of it. It's not a real thought process relative to international trade policy, but it's really more of throw something against the wall so we'll stop talking about the exodus of his staff and the investigation into his administration.
You can go back to day one of this administration, and it started out with the ban on travel.
Yes.
Particularly Muslim
Yeah,
travel.
countries. Yep.
Whether you agree or disagree with that policy, clearly it wasn't well thought out. All the T's weren't crossed and the I's weren't dotted. With this policy, it was announced as a surprise. He was getting different counsel from within his administration, and he certainly has every right to make a presidential decision But you don't roll it out until you get all the T's crossed, and the I's dotted, and that creates a sense of uncertainty.
Yeah.
So people are asking the question now, is he gonna draw back on the policy? Today, he said he would not draw back on the policy, but you haven't seen all the details to understand how it's gonna work. I can go through just about every major issue, immigration. He met with the Democrat and leaders and some of the Republican leaders and said we had to do something about the Dreamers. Still haven't anything about the Dreamers. He changed his mind later. He had a meeting last week on gun control. Almost, I thought he was going to be dating Dianne Feinstein.
Yeah, that's right. They got very chummy.
They got very close there, and then he pulled back on that. So the issue, is the governing style, of unifying the country, of building coalitions to support. He could, if
But that's a guy who's never built a coalition in his entire life. It's actually slice it all up, right? And then try and.
But the government is different than, running your own show,
Yeah.
Building real estate. And so the question is, let's say he believed, which I assume he does, I'll give him the credit, that this is the right thing to do. We need higher tariffs to protect certain American industries. You do that after you've dealt with people, you've built a coalition, you've moved a little bit to gain more support, and he doesn't seem to do that. So there's a question of how does this government move forward to address problems? If you have a president one day sitting down with the leadership of the Congress and saying we got to get those guns, the next day sitting down we got to do something for the Dreamers, the third day sitting down and say we got to do something about protecting American industry. And you never know for sure what that means because there's always tomorrow.
That's right, and it'll always change. So despite all these things, right, and despite all these criticisms, let's just go to the basic national economy, and then we'll come closer to Rhode Island. The economy's going well.
Well, if you look at it by the stock market, it's had a good time.
Employment, stock market.
But see, it's a continuation of, in some things that Obama started, the job, the monthly.
Did I just hear, stop the presses, I don't know if we have presses here at GoLocal, but I believe I just heard Gary Sasse say, and give credit to, the policies of Barack Obama is what is fueling this economy.
Let me clarify. The recovery, which was a very modest recovery by all historical standards, continues. So during the Obama administration, during last year, the Obama administration, we were creating 200,000 jobs a month.
Sometimes 300,000.
Yeah, we're continuing to create 200,000 jobs a month. There's not very much difference, there. The hope that Trump brought to this, which Obama didn't bring to it, that he was going to implement policies where our economy would grow by 3-4% a year. It was kind of stagnant. It was growing by 2% a year.
1%, 2%.
Coming out of a pretty steep recession.
Is some of that tied to, whether you agree with it or don't disagree with it, deregulation policies across the board? I mean, he has slashed and burned as many regulatory structures as he possibly can. I mean, the EPA is a shadow of what it was 15 months ago.
I think it's hope in the boardrooms.
Yeah.
That there's a friend in Washington that if there are reasonable regulations, now keep in mind the business will see a lot of the regulations as unreasonable. Consumers may not see it the same way.
Yeah.
But there's now hope that somebody in the administration will listen to you if a regulation is unreasonable or adding too much to the cost of business. Even Democrats give that lip service. The governor in the state, I don't know what they've done, but it's given lip service to deregulation. And so that's the psychology is good. The tax cuts, the psychology of deregulation have all encouraged economic growth. But you want to be careful because if you want to slide back into the 1 or 2% growth, put these kind of trade policies in place. He was doing pretty well. The economy was doing reasonably well. We had 2.5-3% growth the last few quarters in gross domestic product. Why then implement policies where you risk that growth and you go back to the kind of stagnant growth? And that's the issue. And the question about what did he think about? Did he think about how this would impact workers who were using the steel to build the cars and the planes? Did he think about the guy sitting in Cranston who had to pay 50 cents more on a six-pack? Now 50 cents more is not a six-pack is not
For a guy
enough.
like you.
No, you go to Walmart, the prices are up for
Yeah.
particular consumers. And when you have government policy that causes prices to rise, that's a tax. So on one hand, you cut taxes, and on the other hand, you undo the benefit people would get from these tax cuts.
Will,
to higher
will any of
prices.
this impact, because it's not made with steel or aluminum, the high-priced $1,000 bottles of champagne that you import, this won't touch any of that, correct?
Well, Baptists don't drink a lot of champagne, I'll tell you. But,
Let's go to Rhode Island.
okay,
Last Thursday, we broadcast live for our first time up at the State House.
how'd that go?
It went very, very well. We had the speaker, Leader Sakarchi, we had the Senate President, we had Chairwoman Serpa. And Kate Nagel asked the leadership of both the House and the Senate about the deficit, both closing this year's gap and next year's 200 million. And, both are committed to finding solutions, but also admitted, listen, we've kind of done all the tricks of the trade. We've done the early buyouts of state workers and other things. We may not have all the solutions in place. We've got a spending problem. And certainly they didn't offer what specifics they were going to put forward. Well, where are we with the state budget?
It's interesting. We spoke for the last few minutes about the economy being strong. Well, if you have a strong economy and you're still running deficits, there's something
Yep.
structurally flawed about the budget. And it's structurally flawed both, we haven't got control of spending. Spending continues to grow faster than revenue. But also, we've had about $80 or $90 million in tax cuts. We've cut the tax base,
Yep.
For good reasons, but we haven't cut spending
Correspondingly.
correspondingly to pay for the tax cuts. So, and we have to balance the budget. That will happen. Gimmicks, I've seen more gimmicks in this year's budget than I've seen in the most recent budgets.
The biggest new revenue is based on the Supreme Court making a decision.
You're betting on Gorsuch.
Right, that's right. Betting on Supreme Court decision seems like, I don't know if the bond underwriters are gonna sign off on that.
I think I ought to call I wonder if the governor's economic consultant was some guy in Vegas that she called up to get the odds on the court decision. But, so the budget has gimmicks, the budget is not balanced. This election year, some of the issues are being swept under the carpet in the guise of cutting Medicaid. We're really cutting payment to providers. So I think there's issues with the budget that really are accumulation of the last couple of years of tax cuts and spending on new programs without thinking that a day of reckoning would come. And the day of reckoning comes when you're having strong economics. What if we go into a recession a year from now? Or not even a recession, just a downturn, a modest correction. This becomes a real problem during the governor's next term.
We've got a revenue estimating report coming up in a few months, right? In May. There's certainly no indication that we're gonna see any dramatic improvement. If we do see a decrease in revenues, lower than what was projected, we've had this discussion as a percentage of the overall budget, this is not cataclysmic. We're not at 10% problem. We're in the low single digits. Well, let's say revenue's off a little bit. How do you clean this mess up when you're up for election, potentially with a primary in September and a general election in November? How do you manage your way through that?
Scoops.
Yep. They've already got all the scoops.
Well,
Do you scoop more?
But
One of the scoops is at Rhode Island Housing. So we go and pass bond issues to give Rhode Island Housing more money to build affordable housing, and then we go back and scoop the money that they're waiting to do for the next round. That doesn't seem to be borrow money to.
No, there's no the silver bullet. One interesting thing, though, no one's talked about this, with the federal tax cuts.
Yeah.
People's taxable income is going to increase.
Yeah.
Because if you pay less federal tax,
right,
you have more taxable income. That taxable income evolves back to the state. So, I don't know what impact, and I wish there are about 20 states that have put out pretty good financial statements.
Rhode Island is not one of them.
No, and I would like to see that because.
But neither of the think tanks, and what's the barrier from some of the think tanks being able to do it? Why can't those folks?
You need the modeling.
You need all the data.
You need all the data, the modeling capacity.
Because we've called regularly to see if
What
any
do they say to
tax
you?
foundation. They say they don't know, that
No.
they don't have an analysis yet.
Because it's quite a bit of work. What,
Yeah.
if you call the state and ask them where they're now?
Yeah, they don't have it yet either. Mike DeBiase was on a few weeks ago with us, and he said, we're just not there yet. We don't know the full implications.
Well, we need to know before May, before the revenue estimating conference, because if taxable income goes up and our tax rates don't go down, then the implication is obvious, we'll get more tax
Yeah.
revenue. And that might be another dividend of the Trump tax cuts.
So that's kind of the worst of all worlds for Governor Raimondo, who's been a very outspoken critic of Donald Trump. Wouldn't it be the ultimate irony if the Trump tax cuts proved to be her saving grace
Well, sure.
in her
No one knows, I don't
budgeting?
think, I don't know it'd be that dramatic, but that's something to look at. But there's no simple answer to the budget. You have to do the blocking and tackling, you have to make cuts. You have to look at the revenue side. Now, no one's gonna look at the revenue side in an election year, so you hope, things improve. I will say this, though, through the first few months of the fiscal year, revenues are holding up.
Yeah.
Probably holding pretty well.
Where are the Republicans this year talking about fiscal issues? We have Pat Morgan on regularly. We talk to GOP candidate Cranston Mayor Alan Fung regularly. Neither one has been putting forth many detailed ideas or any ideas on the fiscal issues. That's kind of bread and butter for Republicans in most states. That's the point of differentiation between them and their Democratic competitors. Where are these two gubernatorial candidates?
I think they have been putting forth ideas.
On fiscal issues, though?
I think, well, if it go back and look at some of the things first, that Pat has said as minority, leader,
Yep.
raising some questions. I was at a meeting that Alan spoke at last week in East Greenwich, the East Greenwich GOP Town Committee, and he had some ideas. His ideas, dealt with Commerce RI. He spoke a lot about Commerce RI and what we were investing and what we're getting back. So it's early in the campaign. You can put out your platform in March, and if the primary is not till September,
Yeah.
so they have to be phased in. But they have been speaking about these issues. Alan speaks about his issue of fiscal management in the city of Cranston. Pat's had a lot of proposals on fiscal issues.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this about Pat Morgan, as a legislator, probably the most proactive in bringing forward ideas, concepts, in trying to address fiscal and policy
And
issues.
that's what you can do in the minority, and that, in effect, is a record.
Do we clean up this budget in a clean way, and the Democrats go along with the governor? Mattiello and Ruggiero put away their swords, and they're out in the first week or second week in June? Or is this one of those years? This has not been the friendliest triad of elected officials that I've ever seen, probably the least friendly that I've ever seen.
Well, they all have
Is
one
this-
thing, excuse me, sorry.
No,
They all have one thing in common.
a re-election?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
they want to get it as soon as possible. So I think they will try to work something out.
We are not gonna go past July 4th.
And but whether they have to come back and fix it next year, that's
Yeah.
a different question. But it's in everyone's political interest to get something done in a reasonable period of time.
And then we chatted a little bit in the green room beforehand. The city of Providence seems to be, we've reported on it, some other news organizations in the Providence market have reported on these new cameras.
Yeah, where are they manufactured?
I don't know where they're manufactured. I wonder if it's Chinese steel or Russian steel.
No, it's an interesting question because, if we're gonna ding our people with the cameras, we must have some people working.
We ought to have some Buy American provision on our traffic cameras. Give credit where credit's due. Channel 12 reported over 12,000 tickets issued in the first 33 days. And about somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 of them showed up today for the first day to fight these $95 per violation tickets. The line went around the Public Safety Commission. Is this government at its cataclysmic worst?
Oh, I don't.
I know that's a low bar to try and lower down that, but this has got to be one of the most And also no public education. No, here's the reason why we need to do it. Here's, it's a public safety issue or it's a revenue issue. No communications on either one.
Well, transparency and communications are important. I really don't know enough about the cameras to say anything intelligent about them. But
Do you need the list of locations so you don't go, racing around in your, what do money men drive?
Bicycles.
What do you have, a Maserati or something like that?
Yeah, bicycle.
City of Providence still looking as dysfunctional. I mean, listen, if they can pick up $1 million a month on new camera fees, but from a fairness aspect, right? You're hitting mostly, for the most part, you're hitting poor urban folks with $100 tax per incident. And let's just say it instead of it being $1 million a month, it drops down. Although they're putting more in.
Yeah, but the camera doesn't have to do an assessment of who's driving the car and what the equity.
But if you put it in locations where this isn't put in East Greenwich or in North Kingstown, it's in primarily, most of Providence is poor. It's a tax on the poor.
But there are a lot of people that come to Providence that don't live in Providence, that they would.
But they come into downtown Providence. There are none in downtown Providence. I mean, you could put one right here. We sit in this window. People aren't exactly driving down at 15 miles an hour. They're usually gunning it down.
Where are these cameras at?
So they're on Charles Street. They're in the West End. They did put a couple in on the East Side this past weekend. One's on Arlington Ave. One's over by Nathan Bishop. I think one's over by Lincoln School. So yeah, they'll capture some folks from outside the city, but most of the cameras are in areas in which it's primarily Providence residents.
So if you have a law, then you have a responsibility to enforce the law.
We have a lot of laws we don't enforce.
No, I'm just saying that, the point of that is it's poor people. Fees are generally regressive.
Yeah.
So that's the fact of life. The property tax is regressive. So let's have a discussion of what's more regressive, a traffic ticket or a property tax.
Well, we made a little bit of progress of getting rid of the auto tax, which was a terribly regressive tax, where in some cases in the urban corridor, you had people paying literally as much annually in taxes as their car was worth. I mean, literally. So that was a big step forward, and we now seem to replace it with, yes, they're going 30 miles an hour in a 25 zone, but there's never been any enforcement on speed limits
I think
in Providence.
The more basic issue is for the legislature. Is this type of enforcement appropriate? And
Gia Russo put in a bill today, or announcing it, to repeal this.
I think that's the proper way to deal with it.
Yeah.
I think there ought to be a discussion as to whether or not this is an appropriate, way to administer our traffic laws and collect revenue. And wherever that discussion leads, it leads. But you need a statewide policy on those cameras.
East Greenwich, do they have those kind of cameras?
I have not seen one.
They're pretty tough on speeders though down in East Greenwich.
I don't speed.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Any predictions coming up?
Predictions on?
Just the state of Rhode Island.
No, I'm just sitting back and enjoying it.
And just enjoying things. Will we get any big announcements from the Hasbros and some of these other major economic development projects that are kind of kicking around?
That's the issue. When you talk about the economy of the state, and you go back and we've looked at how we've done since this administration has come in, and our growth in non-farm employment trails the country, trails Massachusetts. It's better than Connecticut. And while our unemployment rate declined roughly at the same percentage as Massachusetts and slightly better than the national average, there are really fundamental problems. We've lost more blue-collar jobs since 1991. A major growth factor in most of the rest of the country are health and education jobs. We're losing those jobs. If our health and education jobs had grown at the same rate as the rest of the country, we'd have another 10,000 people, working.
Listen, I think the biggest threat to the Rhode Island economy in the next 5 years is the potential of partners coming in here and acquiring the two largest private employers. That is not going to be a net win. That's going to be a huge net loss. Those are high-paying jobs for the most part. The consolidation of back ends alone will be thousands of jobs to Boston, and you've heard Brown University president, very unusual for an Ivy League president to be so far out there on an issue of economics and public policy. This is unmatched, has drawn the line in the sand and said this could be catastrophic to
Well,
the Rhode Island economy and to Brown University's investment in Rhode Island's
Well,
economy.
I'm not sure I agree with that. It certainly will have an impact, but we're part of a regional economy. And so, we'll see, but you can't continue to run health institutions, any major institution that are not economically viable. And so, which devil do you want? Do you want the devil of staying in business? Do you want the devil of more red ink?
Former Director of Health, Michael Fine,
Yeah.
was quoted today in GoLocal saying, listen, we just don't have a health policy. And we haven't had a health policy maybe ever, but certainly for the last 10 years.
Let's start with health, let's go to economic development, let's go to education. You know, there's
The
very.
biggest issues in the state, the most important both socially and economically, there seems to be lack of a functioning white paper that points out where we're going and how we're gonna get there.
And see, so if you sit back and look at the fundamentals, particularly, let's take economic development for a second. And we know we've lost more paying blue collar jobs, which are defined as 35,000 for people under 35 and 45,000 for people above, blue collar jobs.
Yeah.
And we've lost those jobs and we can't replace them. We have zero population growth. Our labor force is stagnant, and even the labor force in Connecticut grew by 1%. Ours is pretty, pretty stagnant. We've talked about the retail problem. We've talked about, population. If it wasn't for immigration, we'd have negative population. So we've talked about failing urban schools. All these problems have been talked about for a long time, and yet our economic development function is geared towards using tax credits and tax expenditures for Wexford, for hotels. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be some of that. Of course there should be some of that. But
The balance is out of whack.
balance on what?
What's the number one for the next governor, whether it's Gina Raimondo reelected or the next governor? What is the number one issue to take on and create a new policy for? Is it economic development, education, or health? Only pick one.
Well,
Only pick one? One.
I would say education, but I don't think you could distinguish between economic development and education. And part of the problem that we have right now is that we are trying to distinguish. Because unless you're producing, a good
Highly
quality-
trained workforce.
trained workforce, it's very hard to do economic development. You have to use tax credits. You're basically, it's real estate versus people.
Right.
And so if you have an economic development strategy that's focused on people, then education is the most important part of that equation.
Yeah.
If you have an economic development policy, based on cranes and real estate, then you give lip service to education. And this government has put in place some good education initiatives, unfortunately none at scale.
With that, you somewhat answered the question of the top three choices. You picked two of them.
That's
So
pretty
that was,
good.
was pretty
That's
good.
You can't, reduce the odds.
I want to thank you so much.
Pleasure.
The money man, Gary Sasse, always with great instincts and enlightenment on everything from federal to state to local issues. This wraps it up for Business Monday. Tomorrow, I have no idea who's on tomorrow. We've changed the schedule around. All these folks are traveling and doing different things. I know this. The last thing I wanted to mention is we had a major announcement at GoLocal today. We are initiating the Alex and Ani Lounge. It's really dedicated to featuring live music by Rhode Island artists. It's going to be starting on the week of the 12th. And we think we're going to do 100 concerts a year live from a separate studio over here on the other side of the wall that we built. And we're really excited about it. I think the arts in Rhode Island, we have amazing talent in the music community. I want to thank Alex and Ani for sponsoring that. But I think it's another great way to promote Rhode Island's talent and look forward to it. Thanks everybody at Navigant for their sponsorship of all we do, and also our friends at Deepwater for sponsoring Business Monday. We are over and out today.